Welcome to the Larry Kreider's Leadership Podcast. Larry is the author of over 40 books, the founder of Dove International, a worldwide family of churches and ministries in 6 continents, and has over 50 years of leadership experience. He and his guests will share inspirational leadership insights from their journey with God. These insights, gleaned from serving leaders in many nations, will transform your life and leadership. For more information on Larry's books and resources, visit LarryKreider.com.
Welcome to the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast. So glad you're with us today, where we learn these small things and small changes we can make in our lives will make a massive difference in our lives and lives of those whom we serve. And back on the podcast today, by popular demand, is Doug Lehman. Thank you for joining me again today, Doug.
Well, it's great to be back again, Larry. So thanks so much for having me. And it's just a blessing to be here.
Well, you shared some amazing things the last time you were here that was just awesome. And there's so much more I want to ask you, so I appreciate you coming back. And we want to talk about team building today. We want to talk about Bi-Vocational ministry today because you do that well. And we just want to talk about things you would even say to younger leaders. So let's just get started. You pastor a church in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, Overflow. Tell us about Overflow Church. Tell us about that.
Sure, absolutely. My wife and I planted Overflow Community Church in 2006, not 19. Wow. Really 2006. And it's been a crazy journey, crazy good, crazy challenging. And we just seen God's faithfulness through it all. We probably plateaued several years ago. Weren't quite sure if it was time to pass it on, time to, say this, right. It's been great, but time for something else. And yet God just didn't give us a release. And in 2019, we ended up purchasing a bar in our town. It was Dilly's Bar and Grill that had went out of business. And we ended up over the course of the next year and a half, actually during COVID, we ended up rehabbing the facility, fixing it up, moving in there. And in that process, our attendance, and like all church leaders, we're not supposed to talk about attendance. We're not supposed to care about that because we're to measure our growth in other ways, but we all care about those things.
We care about people.
We care about people, so we care about, and we always, when we know 2 healthy things will grow. Right. That's just a natural, it's part of God's creation. That's right. And so that initial move into the new space, we tripled in attendance. Our ministries have been able to the neighborhood, have been able to increase. We just went through the Thanksgiving season. We were able to, what was one of the neat things about this bar before they closed, every year they would do a big Thanksgiving dinner. Okay. And they would hand out over 500 meals free to our community, to people who needed meals.
The bar did that?
The bar did that,
That's amazing.
And so that was one of the things that a tradition, a thread that we wanted to carry on. And so this year, we set our sights not at 500, but we did about not quite half of that, 200 and some meals to local Meals on Wheels, to our neighborhood right around our church building, to the local EMS services. And so it's been really just neat. And the amazing thing, Larry, with that is all of the people who, the majority of the people who carried out that vision, carried on that vision, were not part of our Overflow family before we made the move we call it the TAP, before we moved to the TAP building. Wow. And so it's just really cool to see what God's doing. And it's really it's even changing my style of leadership right now, because instead of having to make everything happen, as a small church petty pastor feels pressure to do, I've been able to just allow others to take ownership, which we'll get to here in a while. Okay,
we sure will. Now, talk to me about your bivocational situation. Like, you're also in business.
Yes.
What is that at the same time? What does that look like?
Yes. So what that looks like and what that has looked like, just real quick history. I grew up on a dairy farm. Yeah. My father and I dairied together until I was 30. When I was 30, we sold the cows. We either had to expand substantially or get out. So we chose to get out. At that point in time, my wife and I, we built a chicken house. It was for cage-free chickens, and we began getting eggs every day, gathering eggs every day. And so 2 years later, built the second one. In 2007, built the second one, which we still just have two, currently have two. And that began, so we built the first chicken house in 2005, planted Overflow in 2006, built the second chicken house in 2007. But the amazing thing it was, and still is chickens, for the most part, are very flexible. Their time schedule compared to cows, for those of you who understand farming, is the times, it's just very flexible.
Yeah.
And then also it's very, I don't know if easy is the correct term, but I can teach someone to take care of chickens fairly quickly.
Right.
It's very difficult to teach somebody to take care of cows very quickly. And so my resource pool is much greater when it comes to the bivocational farming with having layers.
And you have a team on both sides, I'm sure. You have a
Yes.
team with the farm and you have a team with the church. We'll talk more about that later.
Yes. Yeah.
And that makes that work. And then talk to me about India. You've had such a heart for India. You've been to India so many times. You oversee, leaders of over 500 churches in India. It's amazing. Talk to me about how you got there. How did that happen?
Yeah, that's a great story.
I know,
and I'll try to tell it in 2 minutes. Actually, in 2010, my wife and I adopted our daughter from the country in Nepal. Mm-hmm. Amazing story. And God just moved powerfully. And so we spent some time in Asia during that time, not in India, but in the country of Nepal. Several years after the adoption, I had a gentleman, John Tufel, good friend of mine who I've traveled with many times to India. He approached me about going to India and doing a seminar, leadership seminar.
Sure.
And I said, let me pray about it. And he said, well, that's a Christian way of saying no. But I did pray about it. Jen and I prayed about it. And about 2 months later, I got back to him and said, hey, I'm willing to go. This would have been in 2013. And so we made a trip in 2013, took a team of people over, did a leadership seminar, went very well, enjoyed it. But actually then did not go back to India again until 2016, where the same gentleman invited me back. He had before, but it just didn't work out to go. And by that time, Dove was, I think we had one church at that time in India with a couple other ones asking questions. And Larry, you invited me to go one time, and I said no. It wasn't the time. If you remember that, I didn't go that first trip. The timing wasn't right. Probably 2014 or 15, I think that was. And so I didn't go. But in 2016, we went over and we gathered leaders together who were connected to us somehow in some way. And then we created an apostolic team, and you led that team, and myself and Brian Souter and Hesben Adindo were the leadership there. Right. And just back to the favor thing, we would go into India and teach and preach and share Jesus, and there was this favor. Right. And connections were made, and we're still having them. We just had our first virtual online conference here that went very well.
That was amazing.
2 months ago, maybe a month ago now. And we connected more leaders. And so, so it feels God's doing some amazing things there in India in all different parts of the church. Right. But we're seeing, especially in the Dove family right now, even during COVID and the challenges that particularly in India, they face the expansion of the kingdom has increased instead of decreasing. And so just excited to be part of what God's doing there and providing really what we're doing there. Our role is from the West here is providing leadership support and training and trying to help the church in India work together and support and help one another.
So. Over the last few years, you've been leading that team, doing a fantastic job. And obviously in all three entities we talked about, local church, your business, and your work in India, all three, you've had to build teams to make that work because you couldn't begin to do this yourself. You've built teams. And you learned a lot about team building. We want to focus on team building for a while. Let me ask you some questions about that. You've learned a ton about this. So give us some basics as to how you learn to build teams. What does team building look like to you?
Well, team building is one of those things that I think is so important. And as the kingdom continues to grow, teams are going to become even more important, and we've seen this. Right. And, my first team that I would have built would have been a youth ministry team. Mm-hmm. And it went well for about 3.5 years, and then the team sort of fell apart. Some things happened, and it wasn't even necessarily, just people had children and some life things happened. But I remember, and that was hard. And so I took a hard look at myself and say, okay, what was my role in this team not sustaining or not being the same. And then I've built leadership teams, in different places, and some of them are going very well. Some of them have had their challenges at different times. But one of the things that I think I've learned about team building is your why of what you're doing is so important.
Okay.
So you mentioned why do I have a chicken house?
Right.
Well, honestly, if I'm gut level honest, I do that so that I can feed my family.
Right.
And do ministry,
Right.
and sort of tag team that.
That's
so
right.
when I think about the why of that team, I need to make sure it's functioning smoothly, efficiently, and cost effective, right?
Right.
There's a why there. I coach
Right.
basketball, and I have a coaching team. I have 3 assistants that help me right now, and they're a great team. But why do I have that team? I create, and then in our church, what's the why? And I've learned that the why is so important because the why will attract your who.
That's really good.
So people are attracted by your why as a leader. This is really important, I think, for leaders. But your why of what you're going to do, whether it's business, whether it's church related, whether it's community related, those kind of things, your why will attract your who. And what I've found out is if my why in one particular area changes, the who will change.
Interesting.
So one of the reasons when I look back that maybe my leadership teams have changed and shifted, and it's not always felt good.
Right.
I've not maybe always seen this, but it's because our why would change. And so if your why changes, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not good, but when your why changes, your who will change. And just a quick example from the church experience with this. When Jen and I, in our early 20s, we were farming, we were in youth ministry, we moved off the farm to town. I'd mentioned in our previous podcast we did, and we lived in town. And growing up, how we grew up, that was like nobody did that.
Right.
But
in
our
your culture,
world, in our
your
culture,
setting, right.
so nobody was doing it. So that was looked at as something radical.
Mm-hmm.
And then the way our youth group ran, it was a very diverse, multicultural youth group. We had a whole group of kids that were from a private Christian school that was mainly white. Mm-hmm. We lived in a neighborhood of mainly minorities that went to the local public school, right. And so we had both these kids groups. Like it wasn't happening anywhere else. Right. So it was looked at as whether it was radical or not.
It appeared radical to those around you.
Radical, and then we decided we wanted to plant a radical church that didn't look anything like where we came from, which is really hard to do, as you know.
Yeah, I do.
Well, no, but we did some things that looked radical. We met Sunday evenings instead of Sunday mornings. Yeah. We come as you are, and a lot of churches say that, but we really meant it. Like people would really, and they still do, come as you are. Sometimes we should maybe change that, but so there was. Our initial group of leaders were attracted to us because one of our whys, I wouldn't even put definition to it back then, right. But one of our whys was just to be different. It wasn't necessarily we wanted to share Jesus and see people come to know Jesus, yes. But part of and so people were attracted to that being different. And so then as we grew and as the ministry matured and we realized that, being different's not always better, and so we made some shifts and then we weren't different enough anymore. And so we would lose some of those early leaders. And so that's an example of the why changing. And right or wrong, it's not. Sometimes the why needs to change, but your why will attract your who. So the why of what you do or your organization is so important.
Good. Talk about ownership and teamwork. How does that work?
Yeah. So one of the things, and this is something I've learned recently from a good friend, a new friend. One of the things I've learned is so important in leadership, team building, in anything is I'm always trying to develop new friendships. Which will lead to just challenging me in different areas. Right. But one of the things we learned early on, once again, my wife and I planted this church. It was our vision. It was, and so often over the course of the first 10 to 12 years of Overflow, it was Doug's vision. Or it was Doug and Jen's vision. Right. And what did Doug and Jen want? Right. And so Doug and Jen were expected to make all the decisions. Does this make Doug happier? And Doug's sitting back going, sorry, I'm talking about myself in the third person, but I'm going back saying, no, I don't want to, I'm okay with you making a decision. I don't need to know if we're having pizza for our fellowship meal or if we're having pot. I don't care. but it still would always come from me, and I'm like, what's wrong with this?
Yeah.
Like something's not right here. And what I've discovered is the power of ownership.
Yeah.
We went through a process during COVID, right at the beginning of COVID, where we brought a team of people together from our church, and we said we wanted to sort of recast vision, rethink vision. Well, this wasn't the first time we did that, but this was the first time we involved people outside of ourselves. Outside, and I don't mean outside of our church body, just outside. Although we actually hired a consultant to help us through that process, which is why that's a great thing to do, to get that outside perspective. But what happened was, as we went through the process of vision and missioning, what's really ironic is it really didn't land very far from where we were.
Right.
It wasn't this crazy new idea or something. A lot of the words in our statements were the same.
Right.
How of what we were doing was the same. The why shifted a little bit, which was really good. But at the end of the day, instead of Doug and Jen and maybe one or two other people owning the vision, all of a sudden we had a team of people own the vision. And so whenever somebody so it's no longer just Doug's vision or Jen's vision. Now I lead that vision.
Sure.
I champion that vision.
Right.
So I'm out in front of that. But and so when we involved others in the process and listened to them,
you said it well.
Took their advice, and maybe even gave up some things maybe that we would have liked or been more comfortable with. But what it is, people took ownership of that.
Yeah.
And so in our Thanksgiving meal I mentioned earlier, there was a group of people who took ownership of that. I didn't lead that. I didn't run. They took ownership of that. And it was their thing.
Right.
It's Overflow's thing.
Right.
And so instead of it being Doug's thing. And so if you're going to build team, your team has to feel they're not just there to support the primary leader's vision.
Right.
They're not just there to be the rubber stamp on whatever the president, CEO, pastor want to do. No, you need to, as the leader, listen to them, take time, probably more time than you want. Most of us who lead teams like to get things done fast.
Right.
We don't want to wait. But if you're going to create ownership, it takes time. Like our visioning process that we did really was probably a 6 to 10 month process. Mm-hmm. Where if I did it myself, it took me literally probably a week.
Right.
But yet nobody else.
It would have just been you fulfilling the vision.
It just would have been me. So it's so important, that ownership, and then other people. Then what's happened for me now with this, other people are carrying that in their hearts. I don't have to carry the whole thing. Right. And so it lifts my load as a leader as well.
You bring other people into the process, and that's what you've been doing. You remember we had our 2020 challenge a couple years ago as a Dove Global Movement.
Yes.
And we had plateaued a couple hundred churches worldwide. And in prayer one day, it was really clear to me that if we ask the Lord, He'll give us the nations, Psalms 2. And so we said, okay, I'm going to believe God for that. And I had this impression, if we really believe God by 2020, there could be, 1,000 churches. Well, it was crazy. Yeah. But I was the only one who had the vision. My wife, Laverne, didn't even have it at that point. So it took a while until she said, yeah, this sounds like it could be God. And then we went to our leadership team, took a while there, but then we all together owned that vision together. Yeah. And we saw it happen by a year early, 2019, we saw it happen. Yeah. But so I just confirm what you're saying so much. That whole ownership piece is so important. Bringing people into the process is so important. It's a key to leadership. So anything else you learned in team building?
Yeah, as when I'm looking to build teams, and maybe I'll think outside into my basketball coaching experience here a little bit. When I'm looking for teammates there, I'm not talking about players, I'm talking about coaching teammates. I'm looking for people who really bring out the best in each other, who challenge one another, who don't agree all the time, who get frustrated sometimes with one another. But at the end of the day, I'm looking for people who are able to disagree together. And I don't mean because I don't like disagreement, but are able to be okay with disagreeing with one another.
Agree to disagree.
To facilitate growth and to make one another better. Yeah. Because I think the best teammates are those that make us better. Sure. And I think some of my early teams, looking back, I probably looked more for people who agreed with me. Yeah. Because it was easier. Like, honestly, it's easy because if or maybe even if they don't agree with me, they at least won't tell me, right? Or they won't bring it up in a meeting. And so I feel like when I'm looking for teams, I'm looking for people who have a certain skill set, obviously, but then honestly too, looking for people who bring out the best in one another. And
fantastic.
That's what I always, when I make this analogy, maybe in a sermon or in the sports world, I always say, an all-star player compared to a player who's just good is a player that makes other people around them better.
That's good.
So, like
That's
LeBron
good.
James, I'd rather use Michael Jordan, not to date myself, but those guys, they made those around them better.
Right.
The players, their teammates better. Where maybe a player who's just, is a good player, and I won't name any names, but so that's where I think you're looking for teammates, whatever team you're on, whatever field you're in, ministry to business to. The community, you're looking for people who will make those around them better.
Right.
So,
I like that. I know you said once that a team leader creates opportunities for the team to grow together. So what would you say more about that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things, and I think COVID for me really, I learned this maybe before COVID, but it really highlighted this because I think it slowed us down enough that we were able to sort of take stock of everything. But as a team leader, and a lot of the teams I'm on, I lead at this point. And so as a team leader, and for those of you who are team leaders, I think it's so critically important that you're creating opportunities for people to grow. Yeah. Now, when I talk to my team, I say my elder team at Overflow, one of our roles is to create opportunity for those we lead. Yeah. So we create the opportunity, let them take advantage of the opportunity. Yeah. So, but then as a team leader, I create opportunities, and so I'm constantly, hey, have you read this book? Have you listened to this podcast? Hey, let's go to this. Let's watch this online seminar together. There's just things that as leaders, if you're standing still, you're going backwards.
That's right.
Pretty much in anything in life.
That's really true.
And so as leaders, we can't be, I'm constantly looking for ways to sharpen my team's skills. And so how you do that is so important. And then make sure you're doing it with them. Yeah. It's not I know all this and you need this, but no, it's something you do together and grow together. So we'll do retreat weekends at times, which I know you do as well with your teams. Just ways, but it's creating those opportunities and spaces for people to grow.
Yeah, that's good. Some people say, let's look for teammates who are faithful and have good character. And others say, well, I want to find teammates who are gifted and anointed. Where do you come down on that? Yeah,
I think one of the things that I've learned, I've seen, not just learned, I've seen, experienced the 40 plus years, even before I was even a leader, is there's something about the person who is just faithful. Yeah. And so I probably would fall on the side, I would rather find a teammate who's going to be faithful rather than a person who is just gifted. Right. Now, can you be both? Absolutely. Sure. Hopefully you can be both. But I think that often a person who's faithful, a person who has good character, the giftings and the skill sets will follow that. Yeah. But somebody who arrives on the scene having incredible giftings, maybe anointings, depending on your term, skill set, and that's all they have, they usually don't tend toward becoming faithful after the fact. Yeah. It usually tends another direction. And so, so I think finding teammates who are faithful and have incredible character, I think, is where I would land on that one.
Now, I want to ask you a couple questions yet about what you say to younger leaders, but before I do that, just take a minute or two and talk about how you juggle being a business leader and how you juggle being a church leader. I know you're also a basketball coach and you're leading in India. Any secrets in how you juggle that and make that work?
Pray a lot.
Yeah, it's good.
Pray a lot from a practical standpoint. Sure. Recognize, so we all look at our life in seasons, or we use that terminology.
That's right.
It's more of a contemporary terminology. Right. And so I really look at my year in seasons. Yeah. Sometimes it's down to the week in seasons. I break up my weeks. But right now is basketball season. So I'm going to spend more time on my basketball maybe and so something else is going to not get pushed on the back burner, but it's not going to get as much of my top tier of time, so to speak. Right. But then basketball season will be over, and then and so I'm learning, or I've learned that you have to juggle things, but know which season you're in and where you need to put your primary focus.
Okay.
Not that you don't focus on the other
Right.
things, but okay, right now Overflow is getting the majority of my time.
Okay.
Or not the chicken house, like in a couple of weeks
Sure.
my chickens are going out. So
Right.
I'm going to have 3 days where I'm just there.
Sure, that's
so I have to be
good.
there. So knowing that and then making sure when you're not present in those places that you have competent people who are taking care of things that need taken care of. And so back to the teamwork, building those teams. So I have a great team at my chicken house. I have a great team at Overflow. I have a great team with the basketball. I have a great team in India with India.
Yeah,
and so those teammates, and so it probably starts honestly back to the team.
It really does.
If you're going to do multiple things, and so, but one of the things I think you have to recognize, and this is, and where I'm at right now, it feels like in the last several years, all of the things I've been juggling, there's been an expansion of responsibility, and an increased level of responsibility, so to speak, because things have grown.
Yes.
So then I think there's at some point, and we all have to know that maybe you just have to remove one of those. And I'm not going to go on a podcast and say what I'm going to take away, but at some point you have to have the courage.
That's right.
And the humility. And even just, hey, somebody else might could do this better than me, to remove that plate, so to speak, from what you're juggling. Let somebody else take that and move on. And so that's
that's helpful.
I'm right there. So I hope that's helpful.
That is helpful. Some leaders I talk to tell me that they focus on different things, different days during the week. Does that work for you, or maybe not because of your setting? Tuesday they focus on one thing more, and on one other with their team, and then Wednesdays they focus on something else. Does that work for you or not?
Some days.
So
I try to do that. Like often Tuesday and Thursday, I have set aside for more as ministry days. I try not to go to the chicken house those days.
Okay.
But you grew up on a farm, you farm for a season.
I understand it all.
Farming is a 24/7.
It sure is.
The phone can always ring.
Right.
Something can always break down. Something, there's always unexpected in farming.
Yeah.
Well, pastoring and leadership, same, it's 24/7. You're never
right.
off. So while yes, I do try to separate some of the practical parts of both those different plates.
Right.
Those are the two, and India too. India's coming in there as another pretty main plate now too. So I try to set, but it's constant. And then with India, they're on different time zones, so they're awake.
Exactly.
It's really 24/7. But so practically yes, I do separate, but there's just bleeding over all the time.
Yeah.
And you have to just learn to give yourself grace. And,
very helpful.
And clearly communicate with your team so that they don't get frustrated or disappointed in you. Clearly communicate your expectations of them. Make things as easy for them as possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you this, Chad, before we close. I know we're soon running out of time. It goes so fast. What would you say to younger leaders who'd be sitting right here with us right now? If we were like in a room of 100 younger leaders, younger as in teenagers in their 20s, maybe early 30s, and say, what have you learned about leadership, Doug, that would help them? What are a few things you'd share with them?
Yeah, well, just you had sent me this question. I thought, what a great question. And I wrote down, I have 7 things.
Okay, go for it.
I'm going to go through them really quick.
Go for it.
Because I know that our time's limited here. And if you want me to expound on anything, just feel free to ask. But spend more time, number 1, spend more time strengthening your strengths rather than strengthening your weaknesses. When you strengthen your strength, your weaknesses will be strengthened as well.
That is so good.
And I spent a lot of time when I was a younger leader trying to strengthen my weaknesses, and I made them stronger, but then my strengths did not grow.
Right.
And so take time to strengthen your strengths. And if I go to the gym and I focus on what my strengths is going to make the rest of my body stronger or in better shape. If I just focus on my weaknesses there, it'll help, but it's not as good. So spend time on your strengths and on them. Sort of along with that, and something I've really tried to do in the last several years, operate in my strength and delegate my weakness. So know who you are, know what you're good at.
Right.
And be okay with that.
Right.
Like God created us all unique and different, and we're good at some things and we're not good at some things.
Right.
And so I feel like that. So how I've learned to do is I operate in my strengths and not my weaknesses. Like I'm a really bad carpenter. Like I can't cut a straight line. You can draw. I can't draw a straight line with a ruler.
I'm a bit like you. I understand that.
And so like anytime I need house construction done, I have my friends who they watch YouTube and they
they're so good at it.
And I was like, why don't I do that? But then I try to do it and it comes out bad. And so I delegate those things. Show up. Never underestimate the power of presence.
Boy, that's good.
Show up. And if you question if you should be somewhere or not, just show up.
Yeah.
Because you can't go wrong with showing up.
That is so good.
My wife and I have went to a lot more funerals and viewings in the last 5 years and not because more people died, just because we recognize that there's something about showing up. And so show up.
It's good.
It's more important to show up. Time is your friend. Sometimes we think we're busy, and we are busy, but wait on the Lord. Don't succumb to the tyranny of what you deem urgent, because often what I deem urgent is not really urgent at all. And timing is everything, particularly God's timing. I wrote down here the word marinate. Meat that is marinated usually tastes a lot better than meat that's just thrown on the grill really quick.
That's true.
It makes it more tender.
Right.
The flavor pulls out the flavor. And so marinate on things, whether it's vision, mission, how you're going to, what sermon you're going to preach that you're not quite sure how you're going to preach it, a devotional you want to write, a book you want to write, those kind of, like marinate for longer than you think is good, and it's probably good. So marinate on things.
Very good.
Number 5, be intentional about staying healthy. This is like really practical, and I mean physically, emotionally, and spiritual. Wholeness and health is not a given just because we're a leader. I think sometimes, especially if we're a successful leader and we just think that, well, we're just going to be healthy because, we're just busy leading and God's not going to let us get sick, yada, yada, yada. And it don't happen that way.
Right.
Your health is not a given because you're a leader. Make sure, and I wrote down here with that, find and utilize a trusted financial advisor.
I totally agree with that.
If I were to do something different, like practically, I would find and utilize, I've done that now, but early, teens or 20s, find and utilize a trusted, because so many leaders I have met and know are limited due to finances.
Yeah, it's true.
And I don't mean that God don't, and we'll let Brian Souter deal with that. But I don't mean that, but I'm just saying because they didn't plan well, or because they made some decisions that just, it's limiting.
So true.
And so it's not necessarily sin, or it's not.
Right.
It's just limiting. And so find and utilize a financial advisor.
Great advice.
Number 6, choose wisely the sources from which you learn. This is probably more of a recent one, because it's been a bigger focus for me, but choose wisely the podcast you listen to. Make sure that you listen to Larry Kreider every week. Every week. That's a
good
make sure
plug.
you subscribe to that. But authors you read, and even social media you consume, because what you ingest today will shape your tomorrow.
Oh, that's good.
And I've seen over and over and over again people shift.
Yeah.
And it's really, in the last several years, it's become almost more of a pandemic to me than the actual pandemic, is to see people lose their faith, to see people wrestle with the authority of Scripture. It goes back to several things, but one of the big things is it's shaped by who they're being resourced by.
Yeah.
And you will end up being
very good.
And I listen to people I don't agree with, but I do that for different reasons, but I'm very careful when I do that. So choose wisely who you resource. And the last one here, number 7, your 20s and 30s is the time to build your leadership portfolio.
What do you mean by that?
It's a time to grow. It's a time to educate yourself. It's a time to get practical experience. It's a time to marinate. I just mentioned before, too many people, especially gifted leaders, because often people who are going to be really, really good leaders, people recognize that early.
Yeah.
Like, it's not something you figure out when you're 50 or 60, mostly. There's always exceptions to every rule, but you recognize that early, and often they'll dive too quickly.
Yeah.
And I wrote down here, many young leaders fade in their 40s and 50s because they spent their leadership capital in their 20s and 30s.
That's good. That's so true.
And so just take the financial example. Let's say I make a lot of money in my 20s and 30s. You have a great job, I'm making 6 figures a job, and I don't invest it at all.
Right.
I just spend it.
Right.
and then I get to my 40s and I lose my job, and then what do I do?
Right.
Because if I would have just invested that money, I wouldn't have to work for the rest of my life.
That's right.
You know, where in leadership, it's similar where you can be a really good leader in your 20s and 30s,
Mm-hmm.
but I will guarantee you that you can be a much better leader in your 40s than you ever will be in your 20s.
Yeah.
And probably even 30s.
Yeah.
I mean, there's statistics that we can go to prove that.
Exactly.
So take time and maybe what I'm trying to say here is don't move into leadership too quickly.
Yeah.
And don't allow others to push you into leadership too quickly, because that's when this tends to happen.
Yeah.
And so take time to build that leadership and expand your horizons. Maybe go cross-cultural, learn from other people who are different from you. I mean, there's so many things you can do to do that. But often, by the time you're 40 and 50, you just don't want to do those things anymore. So build your leadership portfolio in your 20s and 30s, and then start to pull off of that in your 40s and 50s. And then all of a sudden, what you end up doing in your 40s and 50s will have much more influence and impact than what it would have had if you wouldn't have done that.
Very, very good. Well, let me ask you this, Chet. What are some key issues you find leaders facing today?
Oh, boy.
And we'll do it briefly, but, give me three.
Yeah,
just quickly. Give me three.
One is just this whole thing of I see uncertainty.
Yeah.
There's in the world in which we have given ourselves at some level. There's so much uncertainty, whether it's economically, whether it's socially, educationally. Like there's just not even in the church.
Yeah.
There's so much. Everybody's uncertain about everything, and so there's this lack of stability.
Right.
And so when you're trying to grow something, whether it's business, whether it's a ministry organization, nonprofit organization, like it's really challenging to grow in uncertainty because people don't want to put their time and resources and energy into something that they don't know if it's going to be there tomorrow or not. It's going to be needed tomorrow or not. And so I think learning as leaders how to learn to deal with uncertainty is really important. Another biggie I think is truth.
Yeah.
And this is coming more from the ministry perspective, but truth has become so relative. It's not. But in our culture, it's become so relative, and how to deal with a majority culture that don't believe there is absolute truth, and how to minister and bring people to faith in Christ, who, Jesus is very clear, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That's a pretty absolute statement.
Very absolute.
And yet our world is teaching us that there is not that. And so, what is true was, so I feel like we have to, and I think there's we have to educate ourselves in this area.
True.
We can't educate ourselves to truth. I don't mean that, but we have to know how to respond well and how to listen well.
Give me one more.
So one more would be the whole area of technology. And I'll just go back to farming real quick. I still farm some, egg farm some. I don't crop farm. Technology in farming has changed radically in the last 20 years. Now tractors can drive themselves and plant perfect straight rows of corn with GPS technology. It's amazing. And if you're not on the cutting edge of that, you're not going to get bank loans. You're not going to get some things because you don't stay on the cutting edge. And so technology is something to embrace. It's something to not be controlled by at the same time. I mean, it's such a huge thing. But as leaders, I think technology is something we need to probably embrace as church leaders, especially at a greater level, and realize that God has given us men and women a creative ability to produce these things that connect us, that can be very scary at times, but also such a benefit of the kingdom. And as networks of churches, as denominations, as independent groups of churches, those that don't stay on the cutting edge of technology are going to find themselves either just maintaining or going backwards.
So if you're older, you got to get people in your team who are younger who understand how that works.
Exactly.
And you said it well once. You said the key is to love people when you're in leadership. If you ever stop loving people, you stop leading. That is such a good truth and quote that you've made. Thank you for joining me today for Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast. Any last minute things you want to say? This is your last chance, Doug.
Well, no, I feel like I've said enough.
It's been great. It's been great.
Just thank you for the opportunity, and it's exciting to be. Last thing I'll say. Embrace 2022. It's coming fast. It may be here by the time
it'll be here by the time this comes out. It sure will.
And I wouldn't want to live I wouldn't have wanted to have been born 10 years sooner or 50 years or 100 years. Like, I'm so thankful I'm alive now.
And me
the
too.
Opportunities and possibilities that we have to grow the kingdom.
Exactly.
And see God move are
Yeah.
they're there for us. Let's go get them.
That's it. Doug, thank you. Doug Lehman with me today, Overflow Church, leading Dove India, leaders in hundreds of churches there in India. Obviously, he runs a business, basketball coach. Not much you'd hope to, is there? It's great to have you here today. And just check out the show notes. So everyone who's listening today, check out the show notes, Overflow Church, and all the websites on there. Any other information you want about Doug, want to get a hold of Doug, you get all that on the show notes today. And we're so glad you joined us today for the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast. See you all again real soon.
Thank you for listening to Larry Kreider's Leadership Podcast. If you want more information about any of Larry's books, daily devotionals, small group resources, or any other teachings, go to larrykreider.com.